Today, pretty much any song ever recorded is just a few clicks away. Music is so ever-present that it almost feels like it was always so. We tend to forget that the music streaming services have been around for just about 15 years. While applications like Spotify or iTunes delivered a revolution in accessibility of music, there is something that they just can't get right. The most popular feature that came with music streaming apps is the ability to create your own custom playlist. This is fantastic, except the experience becomes stale after several playthroughs. Same song is always playing first, you know exactly which songs are going to be played next, and you might never get around to the good songs that are at the bottom of the playlist. Exactly because of that, the shuffle function was implemented. Its job is to randomize the order of songs in your playlist. Sounds simple enough, but apparently it is not. This function has caused a tremendous amount of headache to the application developers, as users have been constantly complaining about the shuffling function ever since its implementation. People don't believe that a random function is really random. Issue being that certain songs are being played frequently on repeat, while other songs are never played at all. Even today, if you visit official forums or places like Reddit and Quora, you will find fresh complaints still floating in. It is quite ridiculous to think that at a time of a booming artificial intelligence, billion-dollar companies can't get a simple shuffling function right. While researching the subject, I found the explanations on the internet to be insufficient. So to really get to the bottom of this, I decided to code on my own application which performs shuffle and allows me to properly test out what is actually going on. I'd say that I found something quite interesting that explains a big deal about why developers can get shuffle work as users would like it to work, but we'll get to that later in the video. First, in order for you to get a full picture of the matter, we need to talk about human perception of randomness. Because, as it turns out, most people don't really know what true randomness actually looks like. And as the developers of the music player applications found out, we even expect randomness to look a certain way. Best way to demonstrate this is to show you a quick example. Here's a board with 25 squares. Let's assign a unique number to every square. Now we are going to be selecting and highlighting 4 squares on the board at random. For that purpose, we'll be using, let's say, a lottery machine with balls. There are 25 balls, each representing 1 square. We do our first draw and we get 23, 2, 11 and 9. Highlighted squares are all over the board and this sure feels random. Now we do our second draw, and we get 19, 25, 23, and 20. Now this is a bit weird. Why are all the highlighted squares in the same corner? Why are they all so close together? Something seems off here. But this is actually perfectly random as well, and the second outcome has the exact same likelihood of happening as the first one. We should treat both outcomes in the same way. And yet, we like the first one, but we are suspicious of the second. Exactly this sort of a clustering that you can see in the second example triggered an avalanche of complaints against Spotify's initial shuffling algorithm. Users turned on shuffling, and what happened was that they often heard several songs from the same artist in succession. This didn't fit well with their expectation about random selection. People expected that songs would be played from all over the playlist without any continuation, and yet successive songs which were close together in the original playlist were often following each other even after shuffle. So, users complained that shuffling is not sufficiently random. Funnily enough, unknown to them, what they actually complained about was that it was too perfectly random, and they just didn't want that. To fix this, developers implemented a more complex shuffling algorithm, whose job is to prevent clusters from occurring. If we return to our square board example, with the new algorithm, the second outcome will never happen. Instead, it will ensure that the selected squares are evenly spread all over the board every single draw. Nowadays, Spotify's playlist shuffle is not truly random then, but it rather delivers an outcome which is more in line with human perception of randomness. If you would like to know more, there is a great blog post about this written by one of the Spotify's developers. It is a short read with pictures, I highly recommend it and I will leave the link in the description. Now, this post was published in 2014, and it sounds like the issue was solved. So, why are there still complaints floating in about shuffling 9 years later? That's a question I haven't found a good answer for on the internet. There's a lot of guesswork and speculation going on. Some are even blaming Spotify for promoting certain artists, that being the reason why some songs are played more often than the others. Could be. Frankly, we can't see what exactly makes the gears turn on their end. But what I can do is to try to replicate what they do. That is to try to recreate song shuffling on my own in my own application, and see what happens. Here is how I went about it. Most complaints are not anymore about hearing the same songs during a single playthrough of the playlist, but rather the same songs appear repeatedly on separate playthroughs. Meaning, you have a playlist made of, let's say, 300 songs. You're going to turn it on with shuffle enabled, and you're going to listen for an hour, which could add up to some 23-minute songs. After you are done, you close the application, and next day you repeat the exact same thing. You listen for an hour, which gives another 20 songs. And the complaint is that between these two groups of 20 randomly selected songs from a playlist of 300, there could be up to several repetitions. This is exactly the situation that I decided to recreate and test out in my app. Here it is, and here is how it works. On click, the shuffle button will fill two separate lists with 20 random numbers each from a selected range. In this case, with numbers between 1 and 300. Each number represents a unique song. Afterwards, the program will compare both lists, and in case he manages to find a number which appeared in both lists, the program will highlight that number for us. Let's give it a few goes to see what happens. 1 repetition here. 1 again. That's 2 this time. None. 3 of them here. That's 2. And 1 repetition here. So this is pretty interesting, as it tells us that if your playlist contains 300 songs and you give it 2 separate shuffled playthroughs, each time listening to 20 songs, you can expect at least one same song to be pretty much always played in both instances. 2 or 3 songs not being such a rare occurrence either. Now, let's add another third separate playthrough of 20 shuffled songs. Well, I won't bother to count them this time, you can see on your own what is happening. Repeated songs range from 1 or 2 double repetitions in all 3 lists, and then there are cases where up to like 1/4 of all the songs are highlighted as repetitions. Maximum number of separate playthroughs that I can add is 5, so let's do that now. It basically turns into a rainbow at this point. I would say that on average about 1/3 of all the songs are highlighted as repetitions. We are comparing 5 groups of 20 songs, that is 100 songs, which amounts to 1/3 of the whole playlist. You would certainly expect some songs to repeat at this point. But I would bet that most people would underestimate just how many songs they can expect to be repeated on average. I don't even think that users will give it much thought overall. They will just hear the same song that they heard on their previous shuffled playthrough, they will find it an odd coincidence, and they will probably complain about it. Now, let's see what happens if we increase the amount of songs in our playlist to something like 1000. Repetitions decrease quite a bit, but as you can see, you should still expect to hear a few songs repeatedly, and you should perhaps even consider it a rare occurrence, if none of the songs repeats itself. I realized that what is happening here is actually very similar to something that I covered in one of my previous videos. Something that as well challenges people's expectation about coincidences. Birthday paradox. Birthday paradox states that in a group of 23 people, there's a 50% chance that 2 people will share the same birthday date. There are 365 possible dates a person can be born on. Birthday paradox doesn't factor in the leap year, so if you are born on a February 29th, for a while we'll pretend that you don't exist. Anyway, as there are 365 available dates, that means that you need a group of 366 people for there to be a 100% chance that 2 people will share the same birthday date. In a group of 365, it is unlikely, but still possible, that everyone could have a unique birthday date. So it takes 366 people to have 100% chance, but only 23 people are needed to have 50% chance. It seems odd on the first glance, but it is so. What explains this, and what people don't realize, is just how many possible combinations you can make from a group of 23 people, because you can pair everyone with everyone else. There are 253 possible pairings that you can make between 23 people, and all you need is just one match. Now, how this applies to the shuffling paradox. When you are comparing 2 separate groups of 20 songs, you need to make 400 comparisons between them. When you compare 5 separate groups, you need to compare the first group to second, third, fourth, and fifth. That's 1600 comparisons. Next, you need to compare second group to the third, fourth, and fifth group. Another 1200 comparisons. Next, you compare third with fourth and fifth, 800 comparisons. And in the end, fourth compared with fifth is 400 comparisons. So 1600 plus 1200 plus 800 plus 400 equals 4000 comparisons. That's a lot of possibilities for a match. But you have to remember that this is based on the fact that you will listen to 20 songs each time. This number, 20, was chosen arbitrary, but it is in fact extremely impactful. Imagine we would double it, from 20 songs to 40 songs. Number of comparisons between two groups would increase from 400 to 1600. So it wouldn't double, but it would quadruple. Number of comparisons between 5 groups would likewise increase from 4000 to 16,000. Now, does this confidently explain why people are still complaining about shuffling function to this day? No, I guess it is still possible that Spotify is just promoting certain artists, as some are suspecting. But on the other hand, I'm sure that the likelihood of coincidences between several individual shuffled playthroughs is grossly underestimated by most users. However, Shuffle in my application is perfectly random, while as you remember, Spotify is using cluster breaking shuffle. That is going to have some impact, and most likely for worse. The cluster breaking shuffle is achieved by evenly distributing songs through the playlist. It works like this. If you have in your playlist 5 songs from the same artist, first step will be to divide your playlist into 5 even parts. After that, each of the 5 songs will be deposited somewhere in those 5 parts, 1 in each. To give you an example, if your playlist has 100 songs, one of those 5 songs will appear on average among each 20 songs you listen through. In reality, it is a bit more complicated than that. There are additional steps which are randomizing the placement a bit more, but this should give you a good general idea. Now, how is this even distribution going to make matters worse? If the distribution was perfectly random, all 5 songs could end up, for example, in the second half of the playlist. But because of the even distribution, there always needs to be one of the 5 songs in the first part of the playlist. This is increasing the chance for regular coincidences and consecutive playthroughs. Another issue is the way in which it is decided which of the 5 songs is going to end up in the first part of the playlist. This is basically done by a virtual equivalent of a lottery machine draw. The song that draws number 1 is going to end up in the first part of the playlist. If you ever played any game with dice, you know that it sometimes happens that dice lands on the same side several times in a row. In a similar way, same song by pure luck can easily draw number 1 on consecutive playthroughs and because of that often end up in the first part of the playlist. This effect is going to be somewhat diffused, because you will have different amounts of songs from various artists in your playlist. The consecutive outcomes would in fact turn out to be somewhat similar to what we saw previously in my application, but coincidences would be even more frequent and regular. Cluster breaking algorithm delivers stellar results for a single separate playthrough, but for consecutive playthroughs it is far from ideal as it increases the chance for coincidences. Simply, consecutive playthroughs might end up being very similar to each other. If this is the issue, then how could it be fixed or improved? One way would be to implement a memory of sorts. Music application would remember when was the last time that you listened to a certain song. On Shuffle, first step would be to sort the songs from the least recently played song to the most recently played song. Then, the playlist would be divided in half, and each half would be shuffled separately by the cluster breaking algorithm. This way, the songs that you haven't heard in a while would be always served first, and the songs that you heard recently would be pushed to the bottom of the playlist. Resulting experience would still be somewhat limited by the amount of songs that you have in playlist and the amount of songs that you listen to on each playthrough. But overall, I think that it would deliver a better shuffle.